The rain had become part of his mornings now. It slid down the cafe windows in delicate threads, blurring the outside world into streaks of silver and gray. Inside, the air smelled of roasted coffee and damp paper. The quiet symphony of a city waking up. Liam sat by the same window every day, table by the far corner, second chair always empty, his gaze fixed not on the coffee before him, but on the door. The barista knew him by habit. "The usual," she'd ask, and he'd nod. Not because he wanted it, but because routine had become easier than hope. That small cafe, tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop, had once been just another stop in a noisy city. But then, on one rain-soaked evening months ago, everything changed. It had been late. The sky had cracked open with thunder, the streets reflecting the glow of yellow lamps. She'd walked in, drenched, quiet, radiant in that unintentional way that happens when someone's too lost in thought to care about appearances. Aria. He hadn't even known her name at first, just that her eyes looked like they'd seen too much and still held something soft, something alive. She'd asked if she could sit, the cafe nearly full that night. He'd nodded, wordlessly moving his laptop aside. What followed wasn't a conversation. Not really. It was more like two souls, recognizing each other in silence. She'd smiled faintly when their hands brushed as he passed her a napkin. "Thanks," she'd said, her voice calm but distant, as if she were somewhere else entirely. That night, they spoke about small things. Music, books, cities they'd never been to. He remembered the way she laughed, quiet, almost afraid to exist, yet impossible to forget. Then, as suddenly as she appeared, she was gone. A phone call, a quick apology, a promise to come back. And then, nothing. That was 91 days ago. Every morning since, Liam returned to that same cafe. Maybe it was foolish, maybe even insane, but something in him refused to believe that kind of connection could vanish into thin air. Sometimes, when the door opened, his heart would stutter, a flicker of hope, quickly extinguished when it wasn't her. The barista Maya had stopped asking after the first few weeks. She just gave him a kind, knowing smile when he came in, placing his coffee on the table like clockwork. Rain or sun, he came, always the same time, always the same seat. The cafe became a ritual, and the rain became his confessional. He'd started writing in a small leather notebook, words that weren't meant for anyone else, fragments of thoughts, sketches of her smile, questions he'd never asked. Who were you running from that night? Did you ever mean to come back? Sometimes he wondered if she'd forgotten him completely. Other times, he imagined her walking through that door, her eyes lighting up in recognition, saying, "I told you I'd come back." That thought was both a comfort and a curse. Days turned to weeks. Seasons threatened to change. The flowers in the shop next door shifted from tulips to lilies, then to dried arrangements as summer faded. The rain grew colder, and still, Liam waited. On the 92nd day, something changed. The city felt off, quieter. The cafe was half empty. A news van idled outside. He paid it no attention. He was halfway through his second cup when the door opened, and for a brief, dizzying second, he thought it was her. The shape was similar. Slender frame, dark coat, umbrella in hand. But when she looked up, the stranger's face was different. Still, something in that moment sparked something deep inside him. He sighed, leaning back, watching as droplets fell from the umbrella tip to the floor. He closed his notebook, rubbing the cover absent-mindedly. Maya approached. "You're still writing," he nodded. "Trying to?" She glanced toward the door. "You know, sometimes people do come back, just not when we expect them." He smiled faintly, or not at all. But that night, as he walked home through slick cobblestone streets, something tugged at him. A whisper of intuition. He turned a corner and saw her. It wasn't an illusion. She was there standing under a flickering street lamp, rain clinging to her hair, her eyes locked on the very cafe he had just left. For a heartbeat, he couldn't move. Then, just as quickly, she disappeared down an alley. He chased her, not fast enough to seem desperate, but enough that his heart forgot how to breathe. The rain was relentless, turning the world into a blur of light and shadow. When he reached the corner, she was gone. Only a small scarf remained caught on a lamppost, soaked and trembling in the wind. It piqued, up clutching it as though it were proof she had ever been real. The next morning, he returned to the cafe early, scarf folded neatly beside his notebook. The rain hadn't stopped. The city felt suspended, waiting with him. Every time the bell above the cafe door chimed, he looked up. Every time, disappointment stung a little less, and hope grew a little quieter, but never completely silent. Days passed again. The scarf stayed by his side, a silent promise of a story not yet over. One evening, as dusk painted the windows gold, Maya set down his coffee and paused. "You've been coming here for months, Liam. What if she never returns?" He smiled, faintly. "Then at least I'll know I waited for something real." Outside, the rain softened to a mist. The world seemed to exhale. He opened his notebook to a fresh page, the pen hovering above, and for the first time, instead of writing about her absence, he began to write about the possibility of her return. He didn't know that, at that exact moment, Aria was standing across the street, under the awning of the flower shop, watching him through the glass. Her hand trembled as she reached for the door handle. And for the first time in 98 days, she took a step toward him. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly, breaking the hum of quiet conversation. Liam didn't look up right away. He was halfway through a sentence in his notebook, pen pressed gently against the page. But something in the air shifted. It was subtle, like the moment before a song begins, the kind of silence that holds its breath. When he finally looked up, his hand froze. Aria stood in the doorway. The rain still clung to her coat, drops tracing the same pattern they had months ago. The same dark eyes, the same quiet intensity. Only now, there was something different. A shadow behind her gaze, as if she'd lived a lifetime since that night. For a second, neither of them moved. Then, she smiled faintly. "You kept my seat." Liam exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. "You said you'd come back." She hesitated before walking closer, every step slow, uncertain. When she sat down across from him, the cafe seemed to fade. It was as if the city, the noise, the world, had all stepped aside to make room for them. Maya appeared, her expression flickering between surprise and disbelief. "It's been a while," she said softly, placing 2 cups of coffee on the table. Aria nodded. "It has." Her voice was quiet, measured the same softness that haunted him for months, but now laced with something heavier. When Maya walked away, the silence returned, thick and familiar. Liam spoke first. He disappeared. "I know." Her hands wrapped around the cup, fingers trembling slightly. "I didn't mean to." He studied her face. She looked the same, yet different. Her hair shorter, her smile slower to arrive. "You were gone for months, I thought." He didn't finish. The thought felt too fragile to touch. "I thought about coming back every day," she whispered. "But I didn't know if I should." "Why?" "Because sometimes," she said, eyes dropping to the table, "coming back means facing everything you tried to run from." The words lingered, heavy and unspoken. He wanted to ask what she was running from, but the look in her eyes told him it wasn't something easily shared. So instead, he said, "I waited." A small smile touched her lips. "You did?" They sat in silence again, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. Outside, the rain fell softer now, like it was listening. She finally looked up. "You're still writing?" He nodded. "It's what I do when I don't know what else to do." "Is it about me?" He hesitated. "It started that way, but then it became about everything I felt when you left." Her gaze softened. "Can I read it?" "Not yet," he said gently. "Some stories need to finish themselves first." A faint laugh escaped her, tired but real. "You haven't changed. Neither have you," he said. just dimmer. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't look away. I've been through some things, Liam. Things I can't explain, Isley. For a moment, it looked like she might, but then she just shook her head, staring at the raindrops sliding down the glass. Not yet. He nodded slowly, respecting the walls she wasn't ready to take down. They stayed like that until the cafe closed, the lights dimming around them. As she stood to leave, she hesitated. Would you walk with me? Outside, the rain had thinned into mist. They walked down the slick streets, past the bookstore, past the familiar corners that had become part of his waiting. The city hummed softly around them, neon reflections trembling in puddles. Aria's voice broke the silence. The night we met, I was leaving someone. Something. He looked at her, but didn't speak. I didn't plan to come in that night, she continued. The cafe was just a place to breathe. And now? He asked. She smiled faintly. Now it's a place to remember. They stopped beneath a street lamp, the same kind of light as that night, golden, fractured, timeless. She turned toward him, rain catching in her lashes. You shouldn't have waited. I didn't know how not to. For a long time, they just stood there. No umbrella, no plans, just two souls caught between what was and what could be. When they reached the corner, she paused. I don't live far from here. Would you come by tomorrow? There's something I want to show you. He nodded. I'll be there. She smiled again. Softer this time, less guarded. Good night, Liam. Good night, Aria. He watched her walk away, her silhouette fading into the mist. When she finally disappeared, he exhaled. That night, he couldn't sleep. Her words replayed in his mind, pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite fit together. Leaving someone. Something. He opened his notebook and wrote her name for the first time. Just that, Aria. Somehow it felt sacred. Morning came gray and slow. The cafe buzzed with life again, but Liam barely tasted his coffee. When the clock struck 10, he left, heart pounding in quiet anticipation. Aria's apartment was on a narrow street lined with ivy and old balconies, the kind of place where time moved differently. He hesitated before knocking. When the door opened, Aria stood there. No coat this time, her hair loose, her eyes brighter. You came, she said. You asked me to? She stepped aside, letting him in. The room was small but warm, filled with books, sketches, and the faint scent of paint. He noticed a half-finished canvas near the window, a woman sitting in a cafe, rain falling outside. He moved closer, recognizing the scene instantly. That's the night we met, she said quietly. You painted this? She nodded. It's how I remember you. Liam turned toward her, caught between awe and confusion. Why paint me? You didn't even know me. Her eyes soft. Some people you don't need to know. You just feel them. He didn't know what to say. Words seemed too small for the gravity of that moment. But before he could speak, she said something that froze him. There's something I didn't tell you. That night, I wasn't just leaving someone. I was running from something I couldn't face, a mistake that cost someone everything. He stared at her, heart hammering. What kind of mistake? Her lips trembled. My brother. He died because of me. Silence filled the room. The sound of rain outside suddenly seemed distant. I blamed myself, she whispered. I left everything. My home, my friends, my art. I thought if I disappeared, maybe I could forget. But that night, you were the first person who didn't see the guilt. You just saw me. Liam stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper. Aria, you don't have to carry that alone. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she smiled through them. That's what scared me the most, someone seeing me as more than what I've done. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Then maybe it's time to stop running. For a long moment, they just stood there. Two people bound by the fragile honesty of the moment. The rain outside grew steadier again, tapping softly against the window pane. Aria looked up. I didn't come back for forgiveness, Liam. I came back because you were the only place I ever felt real. He didn't reply. He just stepped closer, his presence answering what words couldn't. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Inside, the world held still. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. Then maybe this is where you start again. Her eyes met his, full of uncertainty and something fragile. Hope, with you. He smiled faintly. With us. The room filled with quiet. Not empty silence, but the kind that feels like peace. Finally finding its way home, she reached for his hand, fingers trembling as they intertwined. I never thought someone would wait for me. I didn't wait for you, he said softly. I waited for this moment. The rain outside blurred the city lights into golden streaks. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, marking the hour, and for the first time in 99 days, neither of them felt alone. Morning sunlight spilled gently through Aria's window, brushing over the soft folds of the curtain. The rain had stopped, but the scent of it still lingered, that clean, nostalgic sweetness that always follows a storm. Liam was sitting at the edge of the small couch, a mug of coffee warming his hands. He watched Aria as she stood by the window, her silhouette glowing in the soft light. For a long time, neither spoke. It was a silence that didn't demand words, the kind that comes only when two hearts understand each other's quiet. She turned slightly, catching him, watching her. You're staring again? He smiled faintly. I'm remembering. Remembering what? The first time you sat in the cafe. You looked out the window the same way. I wondered what you were thinking. Aria's lips curved into a small, wistful smile. You always notice the things I try to hide. Maybe because you've been hiding too long. A sighed softly. She leaned against the window frame, eyes drifting toward the sea beyond the buildings. The waves shimmered under the pale sun, restless and beautiful. I used to paint that view every morning, she said quietly. Then one day, I couldn't. What stopped you? She hesitated. I didn't see the beauty anymore. Everything felt gray, even the ocean. He looked at her for a long moment, then said, maybe the color never left. Maybe you just closed your eyes. Her breath hitched slightly. Not from sadness, but from how gently he said it. You make it sound easy. It's not, but it's possible. She smiled, a flicker of hope lighting her face. You talk like someone who's seen a lot of endings. He looked down at his coffee. Maybe I have. Aria walked closer, standing near enough for him to feel the warmth of her presence. You've never told me about you, Liam. You listen, but you never speak about yourself. He gave a small laugh. There's not much to tell. I don't believe that, she said softly. Everyone has something they don't say. He looked up, meeting her eyes. I had someone once, years ago. Her expression softened. What happened? She left. No warning, no goodbye. Just gone. And you waited. He nodded slowly. For a while, until I realized she was in tea coming back. Maybe that's why I kept coming to the cafe. I didn't want to stop waiting for someone. Aria studied him, her gaze deep and understanding. Maybe you were waiting for me. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and terrifying. He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said everything. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the trees. The sound of waves crashing carried faintly through the open window. Aria walked toward the small easel near the corner of the room. She lifted the half-finished painting, the one of the cafe, and set it on the table. Help me finish it, she said. Liam blinked, surprised. I can't paint. Then just be here. Sometimes presence is enough. He moved closer, standing beside her. She dipped the brush into the paint, her hand trembling slightly before steadying. The smell of acrylics filled the air, mixing with the faint aroma of coffee. As she painted, he watched her, the way her expression softened with each stroke, the way her shoulders relaxed, the way her soul seemed to return, piece by piece. After a while, she glanced at him. Your turn. He laughed nervously. You're kidding! Come on, she teased, handing him the brush. It's not about perfection. It's about feeling. He hesitated, then dipped the brush into a soft blue. He added a streak of light through the cafe window on the canvas. Aria smiled. That's beautiful. I just painted what I saw that night, he said quietly. The light on your face when you smiled. Her breath caught, eyes glistening. She turned slightly, their shoulders brushing a fleeting touch that lingered longer than it should have. When their eyes met, the air shifted again. There was no grand confession, no sudden kiss. Just a stillness that hummed between them, the kind of closeness that makes time hold its breath. Later, they walked along the beach, shoes in hand, the sand cool beneath their feet. The sun hung low, painting everything gold. You know what's strange? Aria said. When I was gone, I missed this place. But now that I'm back, it feels new. Maybe it's not the place. Liam said softly. Maybe it's the person beside you. She looked at him, eyes shimmering. You really believe people can change each other? I think sometimes they remind us who we were before the pain. Aria smiled faintly. Then maybe you're reminding me. The sea breeze lifted her hair, brushing it across her face. Without thinking, he reached out to tuck a strand behind her ear. His fingers lingered, tracing the soft outline of her cheek. She didn't pull away. For a heartbeat, they stood inches apart. Eyes locked, breath shared, the whole world fading into the rhythm of the waves. Then, softly, she said, I'm scared. Of what? Of feeling something again. Of losing it. He nodded slowly. That's how you know it's real. Her eyes searched his. And if I hurt you, then, at least, I'll know it was worth feeling. She looked away, swallowing a tremor. You make it sound so easy to trust again. It's not easy, he said, but it's harder not to. They walked in silence for a while, footprints trailing behind them, washing away with each wave. The sun dipped lower, and the sky turned the color of fading dreams. Soft pinks, bruised purples, and gold. When they reached the old pier, Aria stopped. There's something I've been meaning to ask. Anything. That day I came back. Why were you still there? Why didn't you move on? Liam looked out over the water. Because some part of me knew you weren't done writing your story. She smiled, eyes damp. And what if my story breaks your heart? He turned to her, voice low. Then I'll help you pick up the pieces. The wind picked up again, cold and tender. She shivered, and without thinking, he took off his jacket and placed it around her shoulders. When their hands brushed, something inside her cracked open, not from pain, but release. She looked at him, voice trembling. You make me feel like I can breathe again. He smiled softly. Then don't stop. Back at her apartment that evening, she poured them both tea. The quiet was different now, not tense, but full. As they sat side by side, she said quietly, I haven't told you everything. He met her gaze. You don't have to, not until you're ready. But I want to. He nodded. Then I'll listen. And she did. She told him about her brother, about the accident, about how guilt had lived in her chest like a ghost that refused to leave. When she finished, he didn't say it's okay. He just reached out and took her hand. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was healing. After a long moment, she whispered, I don't know why I came back here, Liam, but now I think maybe I do. He looked at her, eyes soft. Why? To remember what it feels like to be alive. Their fingers intertwined, slow and deliberate. Outside, the wind carried the sound of the ocean through the open window. Soft, endless, forgiving. Aria leaned her head on his shoulder. Do you think we deserve happiness after everything? I think we deserve peace, he said quietly. And sometimes, peace looks a lot like love. She smiled through her tears. Then maybe I'm ready to start again. He brushed a kiss against her hair. Then start here. The clock ticked softly in the background. The light faded to gold, then to blue, then to night. And for the first time in years, Aria slept dreamlessly, peacefully, with someone who made her feel seen, not saved. Liam stayed awake beside her, watching the city lights flicker through the curtains, thinking about how sometimes the hardest thing isn't waiting, it's letting yourself finally stop. He looked down at her hand, resting in his, her breathing steady, her expression soft. He smiled. "Welcome home," he whispered. The ocean was louder that morning, the kind of sound that filled the sky, washing through every corner of the beach town. Aria stood on the balcony of her apartment, wrapped in Liam's jacket, watching the tide rise and fall. It had been 3 days since she told him everything. 3 days of quiet mornings and long walks, of laughter that felt strange at first and then familiar again. She hadn't realized how long it had been since she'd let herself feel light. Inside, Liam was making coffee. The soft clatter of cups and the smell of roasted beans filled the air. "You're up early," he said, walking over to her with a steaming mug. "Couldn't sleep," she said, taking it from him with a small smile. "The waves were loud. They always are before the calm," he said, leaning against the railing beside her. She looked at him for a moment. The kind of long, quiet look. It says thank you without words. "Do you ever think," she began softly, "that some people are meant to find each other only when they're both broken?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's the only time they can truly understand each other." The words settled between them, warm and real. Later that morning, they walked along the pier again. The town was waking up, fishermen setting out, children running barefoot on the wet planks, the sky painted in soft streaks of gold. Aria's fingers brushed against his as they walked. "Do you believe in second chances?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "I believe in moments that feel like them." She smiled, her eyes glistening in the sunlight. "Then maybe this is mine." They stopped near the end of the pier, where the sea stretched endlessly ahead. Liam looked at her and said, "You know, for months, I imagined this what I'd say if I ever saw you again. But now that you're here, all I can think is how quiet it feels. Peaceful." She laughed softly. "That's the first time I've heard anyone call me peaceful. Maybe because you finally are." She turned toward the horizon. "I don't know what comes next. I don't even know who I am without the guilt." He reached out, brushing her hand lightly. "Then let's find out together." That night, they sat at the cafe again. The same table, the same corner, the same soft hum of rain tapping against the window. It was almost poetic, how life had led them back here. Maya smiled as she approached, placing 2 cups in front of them. "Feels like déjà vu," she said. Aria laughed. "It does." Liam met her gaze. "Except this time, you're not running." She nodded. "No, not anymore." The rain outside grew heavier, thunder rolling in the distance. But inside, everything felt still, sacred, even. After a while, Aria reached into her bag and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "I wrote something," she said quietly. "Last night, I wasn't sure if I should show you." Liam hesitated, then took it. His eyes traced the soft handwriting. It was a letter. Not long, but honest. "Dear Liam, I don't know what tomorrow looks like, but today, for the first time in years, I want to wake up and see it. You taught me that broken things aren't worthless. They're proof we've survived. Thank you for waiting. Not for who I was, but for who I could become." "Aria," he looked up, his throat tightening. "You didn't have to write this." "I did," she said softly, "because you deserve to hear it." He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "You don't have to thank me. You just have to live." She smiled through her tears. "I'm learning." Outside, the storm began to calm. The rain slowed, the thunder faded. Aria glanced toward the window, her reflection shimmering faintly in the glass. "I used to think rain was a punishment," she whispered. "Now I think it's just the sky learning to let go." Liam's voice was soft. "Then maybe we're both learning." The next morning, she woke to the sound of music, a gentle melody drifting through the apartment. Liam was at the piano, fingers moving carefully, almost shyly. She leaned against the doorframe, watching him. "I didn't know you played." He smiled without looking up. "It's been a while, but last night felt like a song." She walked closer, sitting beside him. "What's it called?" He hesitated, then said, "Aria in Rain." Her breath caught. "You wrote it?" He nodded. "Started it the day you left. Finished it last night." The room was silent for a moment, except for the soft notes filling it, tender, bittersweet, full of everything they'd been through. Tears glimmered in her eyes, but she didn't hide them. She reached out, placing her hand over his on the keys. "Play it again," she whispered. And he did. That evening, they walked along the beach, the tide washing gently over their feet. The air smelled of salt and wildflowers, the sunset melting into the horizon. "I used to think I'd never paint again," she said quietly. "And now?" She smiled. "Now I want to paint everything. The sea, the light, you." He laughed softly. "Me. You're part of the story," she said, looking at him. "I want to remember how it felt to be seen." He reached out, his hand finding hers. "Then let me be the one who keeps reminding you." They stopped near the edge of the water. The waves kissed the shore, retreating gently with every breath. She turned toward him, eyes shimmering like wet glass. "You changed everything, Liam." He shook his head. "You changed yourself. I just stayed long enough to see it happen." A tear slipped down her cheek, and he brushed it away with his thumb. "You once asked if we deserve happiness," he said quietly. "I think this is it." For a moment, they simply stood there, the ocean stretching behind them, the sky blazing gold and pink. Then, slowly, she leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. No words, just the sound of waves and their hearts, beating softly in rhythm. When they finally kissed, it wasn't fireworks or music. It was stillness, the kind that feels like coming home. Later, as night fell, they sat on the sand wrapped in a single blanket, watching the moon rise. Aria whispered, "I think he would have liked you." Liam turned to her. "Your brother?" She nodded, smiling faintly. "He always told me, love isn't about fixing someone. It's about holding them when they break." He smiled, pulling her closer. Then, he was right. They stayed like that for hours, two souls who had wandered through loss and found each other in the quiet aftermath. Days passed, soft and golden. Aria began painting again. Murals, waves, faces, dreams. Her apartment filled with color, laughter, and the scent of new beginnings. Liam kept writing. Only this time the ending didn't hurt to imagine. Sometimes they returned to the cafe, sitting in silence, smiling at the memories stitched into every corner. Maya would bring them coffee with a grin, saying, "Feels like the world's right again." And maybe it was. One evening, months later, Aria stood at an art exhibit. Her own paintings lined the gallery walls, the cafe, the rain, the sea, and one canvas of a man sitting alone, waiting. Liam stood beside her, his hand warm around hers. "You did it," he said quietly. She looked at the painting and then at him. "We did. Smiled. You were always the artist. And you," she said softly, "were the story." They stood in silence, surrounded by light, color, and the faint sound of applause. But none of it mattered compared to the quiet between them. The kind of quiet that only exists between people who have truly seen each other. Outside, it began to rain again, gentle, forgiving. Aria tilted her face toward the sky, closing her eyes. "I used to hate the rain," she murmured. Liam smiled, watching her. "And now?" "Now," she said, opening her eyes, "it feels like grace." He took her hand, and together, they walked into the night. Two souls reborn from the storm, hand in hand, unafraid of the rain that once broke them. The cafe lights glowed faintly in the distance. The ocean whispered beyond the hills, and somewhere deep in the heart of that small beach town, the sound of a piano drifted through the air. Soft, healing, endless, because love, when it finally finds its way home, never truly ends.